All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the International Methods Colloquium. My name is Justin Essery. I'm an associate professor of politics and international affairs here at Wake Forest University. The IMC is a periodic, online, interactive seminar discussion on the application of quantitative statistical methodology to the social sciences, sponsored by Wake Forest University and also sponsored by Springer Publishing. This week's speaker is Shuai Jin of the University of Massachusetts, Boston. I actually see she even has a little logo of her university up top. I should figure out how to do that in my camera. That's cool. Her talk is entitled When Public Opinion Wins, the Big U-Turn in Propaganda of Human Gene Editing in China. Shuai's talk is going to last between 30 to 40 minutes, after which point we will take questions from the audience. You can ask a question using the Zoom Q&A button that appears at the bottom of your webinar window. And you can ask questions at any time during the talk, but we're going to hold those questions till the end. If you wish to be recognized and ask your question via audio, you can indicate this in the Q&A text box and we'll allow you to talk when the time comes. Otherwise, I will just read your question aloud during the Q&A period. A link to Shuai's slides will be available in the Zoom webinar chat window so that you may refer to it throughout the presentation. And now I'd like to welcome Shuai to the IMC. Welcome, Shuai.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for organizing this wonderful platform for people to present their work, especially in this remote world, right? So, all right, my talk here is about when public opinion wins and how the Chinese government have changed its own propaganda of human gene editing. So, the biggest question I want to ask is it possible for authoritarian propaganda to respond to public opinion, okay? Especially when public opinion is in conflict with what the government says. Let me go to the next slide. So in the field of the study of authoritarian propaganda, we know the definition of propaganda is what the government tries to do, right? To transmit positive values or support for the government into human minds. And follow researchers have differentiated hard propaganda versus soft propaganda. Hard propaganda would be more ideological and it would be more like boring, right? And soft propaganda would be more sophisticated, subtle, but the goal is the same, right? To try to influence people's behavior and their values and their emotions. So here in this study, I'm going to study Chinese government's report or coverage on human gene editing. And these messages from the Chinese government official state media actually tries to promote like pro-regime values, especially nationalism, patriotism, which I will explain later. So I define the messages from the Chinese government promoting these pro-regime values as propaganda. So in the field of propaganda studies, these are the main questions people ask. Do authoritarian regimes still have the capacity to carry out propaganda in today's world? And what purposes do they serve? And then the biggest question, is it effective? Okay. And there is a debate about like whether the effectiveness of propaganda. Some people think it's effective. It can still influence people's attitudes, their opinions. Some people think it's ineffective. They do little, like they produce propaganda machine, produce a lot of articles, a lot of reports, but they do nothing or they do very little on influencing people's opinions, values. And then some other studies show they are actually counterproductive. That means they backfire, okay? They backfire and they produce more anti-regime attitudes after people receive propaganda. And then also some arguments are developed saying that the effect of propaganda actually varies by group, especially like education level, socioeconomic level, level of political information. So that's the field of propaganda study, okay? And then the question I want to ask is, okay, then when propaganda, especially when propaganda is ineffective or counterproductive, what will propaganda do? The field basically asks the question from the direction, in the direction from propaganda to public opinion, right? How does propaganda affect public opinion, effective or ineffective or counterproductive? The question I want to ask is in the other direction. How would public opinion affect propaganda? Is it possible for propaganda to respond to public opinion? So there are studies, right? Many studies showing that we face a rising public opinion in authoritarian regimes, in many authoritarian regimes, right? Especially online, on social media, on like Facebook, right? We face this rising public opinion. And the internet is especially a battlefield today for the government and the public to like influence like public discourse on specific issues. So when facing this rising public opinion, what does the literature tell us about what the authoritarian regimes do? Okay, basically there are three strategies according to the literature. Basically, there are three strategies facing this rising public opinion. Authoritarian regimes would engage in censorship, okay, like Keynes study and many others study. Say authoritarian regimes engage in this massive censorship, right? And the second strategy is opinion management, or the so-called opinion governance, which means authoritarian regimes do not just like delete people's opinions or delete people's posts, but they actively promote, like the so-called, in China, the government actively promotes the so-called positive energy, which are posts that are in supportive, okay, of the government. They support the government. So the authoritarian regimes, they also actively manage the opinion online. And then the third strategy is propaganda, more effective propaganda, upgrading propaganda in this digital world. Use social media platforms and also like smartphone apps, right, to enhance the capacity of propaganda. One example would be the Learning Xi Jinping app in China. It's an app that's very popular that many people, especially official public employees, need to download it and then learn like the thoughts, the theories of the party. So these are three strategies according to the current literature of authoritarian regimes facing this rising public opinion. But the question has not been really asked that does propaganda ever influence, does public opinion ever influence propaganda when there is a public opinion crisis, which means public opinion, especially online on social media, is in conflict with the government's discourse. So does propaganda ever respond to public opinion when it's ineffective in influencing people's minds? And through my case study of the coverage of the human gene editing, I find the answer is yes. It is possible for propaganda to be responsive and for public opinion to win once in a while in this battlefield. Now let me turn to the case. The case I observed is a particular case about the human gene edited babies. I believe many of you have read about it or heard about it. On November 26, 2018, a Chinese scientist, He Jiankui, announced the birth of the world's first gene edited babies, twin girls. And the birth of these twin girls was very controversial in the science world because these twin girls, they were when they were just a human embryo, their DNA was altered, was changed. And this technology of human embryo editing, right, is ethically like controversial, and also many scientists thought this experiment was not responsible and also not necessary. So this is the case of the gene-edited babies. My focus here is the media coverage of this story. This story was actually first published by MIT Technology Review on November 25th, but that's Eastern time. So like very early morning on November 26th, according to Beijing time. And the MIT Technology Review first published the story with a very negative tone, criticizing this irresponsible like human experimentation. And then AP published the story with a balanced view, like citing scientists support the experiment and also citing scientists criticizing the story. And then the interesting thing here is the coverage in China, the Renmin.com, which is the online version of People's Daily, first published this story in the Chinese world with a very positive tone. The article, it was a very long article saying this is a great scientific breakthrough by a Chinese scientist, a world's first by a Chinese scientist. So and praised the technology and the difficulties to do this experiment. So it's a very positive article on the story. But then throughout the day, in the afternoon, there are many articles and posts appeared on social media, on WeChat and Weibo, and they were very negative, overwhelmingly negative. People criticized this experiment as irresponsible, unsafe, and they worried about the future of the twin girls. And then in the afternoon, a statement was issued by Chinese scientists, 120 Chinese scientists on Weibo, which is the major social media platform, and they criticized the experiment, saying it irresponsible and unethical. And the scientists especially mentioned that the ethics review for this research was especially problematic. So the scientists pointed out the ethics review process for this research and criticized that process. And then the interesting thing happened. At 7 p.m. on that day, People's Daily deleted its own positive article earlier and then posted on its own Weibo account a negative post criticizing this case. And then more negative posts appeared on People's Daily accounts on Weibo and WeChat both. So here, according to this timeline of the media coverage of this specific case, we see a change. We see a U-turn, a big U-turn in the tone of the coverage by People's Daily. Originally, it was a positive story, and then it was very negative, and the positive story was deleted. But when this story was published, many media forwarded this article, so they could not really delete all of them. So from this case, we see a change, okay? And then the question is why? Why the change? Is it responding to the negative public opinion that appeared on social media? So in order to answer that question, I collected 4 data sets. The first one is the articles from People's Daily. All articles from People's Daily's online accounts, the Renmin.com, Weibo account, and WeChat account, all articles on gene editing by February this year. And I found a total of 380 unique articles on gene editing. I want to see how the tone of people's daily coverage on human gene editing have changed over time. Did they respond to the public opinion specific to the gene edited baby story? And then the WeChat articles. I collected all articles on the gene edited baby story from November 26, 2018 to April 12, 2019 from WeChat. And all these articles are about the gene edited baby story. And I found 691 articles. And then I also compiled all the comments from all these WeChat articles that are left by individuals. That's over 6,000 comments. These two data sets, the WeChat data and the WeChat comments, I want to show the public opinion on this story. I want to show the overwhelmingly negative public opinion on this story. And then Western media articles. I want to test whether the response from People's Daily was actually responding to the Western media pressure. So I collected all articles on the gene edited babies from LexisNexis, and that's in total there are over 400 unique articles. And the method here is sentiment analysis. Okay, I use multiple measures to measure the sentiments of each article. For the Chinese articles, I use 3 measurements. One is a keyword measure, and the other one is a Boston NLP measure, and then human coding. The keyword measure is a very straightforward and the simplest way, basically, of measuring sentiments. I defined positive and negative words specific to the human gene editing story, and then created 2 dictionaries, 147 like positive words, 148 negative words. And then I extracted the first 200 like keywords, TF-IDF keywords from each article. And the measurement is just the weights of the positive keywords minus the weights of the negative keywords. So if this measurement is positive, then it's bigger than 0, then it means positive sentiment. When it's negative, then it's a negative sentiment. And the MLP measure is based on the Boston platform, and it's a classification based on machine learning. It's supervised coding, so the training data is from Chinese news and also Weibo datasets. And it gives a probability of an article, a specific article being positive. And then I also hired 2 researchers to code all the articles from People's Daily, not the WeChat articles. And the categories are positive, negative, and neutral. All right, so here, this table shows us basically a validation of different measurements. And here are the agreement rates between the multiple measures of the People's Daily articles, the 380 People's Daily articles. And we can see because the human coders, 2 human coders have 82% of agreement rate, which is reasonable. And that's because the human coders have 3 categories. They code articles into positive, neutral, and negative. When I asked them to take off the neutral category, then the agreement rate is 99%. But the keyword measure and Boston measure only have 2 categories, positive and negative. So take away the neutral category from the human coders. I compare the human coder measure and the keyword and Boston measure. And I find that actually the simplest way of measuring sentiment, the keyword measure has the highest agreement rate between both human coders. 92% agreement rate between keyword measure and human code 1, and then 90% between keyword and human code 2. So I will focus on interpreting the keyword measure of the People's Daily articles. All right. And then I also need to measure the sentiment of English articles, and it's a different process. For the Western articles, I use two measurements to validate each other. The first one is the text bob measure. It returns two indicators. One is the sentiment measure, and also a positive value would mean positive sentiment, a negative value would mean a negative sentiment. And then it also returns a subjectivity measure, which basically tells whether the article is more objective or subjective. When the value is negative, it means it's objective, which means it mainly contains factual information, not personal evaluation or opinion. When it's positive, then it's subjective. And then I also include the NLTK measure. It returns 3 probabilities for each article, probabilities of being positive, neutral, and negative. So these two measures are meant to validate each other when they measure the Western media articles. All right, so now results. This figure shows the keyword sentiment measure of all the People's Daily articles from the first article that appeared in 2004, 2014, 2015, up until February 2021. And here we see these are all articles about human gene editing. For the 380 articles from People's Daily, when the two human coders code the sentiments, they also coded the categories of the articles. All the articles are categorized into 3 types. One is human gene editing. The other one is gene editing technology in general. And the third one is animal gene editing. So here are all the articles about human gene editing specifically, but not just, they include both human gene editing of embryos and also other normal body cells. So we can see according to the keyword sentiment measure, we can see a significant change after this line. This line is November 26, 2018, when the story of the gene edited babies broke out. So we can see there is a change, a significant change. Before that story, the overall tone of human gene editing coverage by People's Daily was relatively positive and neutral, not very negative. But then after the incident, we see more negative coverage, more negative reports on human gene editing. They specifically talked about ethics and the risks associated to human gene editing. So we see a significant change. And then this figure shows the gene editing technology specifically, gene editing technology in general, actually. Before the story broke out, they were mainly positive. Government praised the technology, and some are neutral, not so negative. But after the story, we see some reports with negative tones, significant negative tones on gene editing technology as well. And then an interesting finding is about animal gene editing. The government have not changed their tone at all. It was always very, very positive. There's no ethical concern for animal gene editing according to the Chinese government, even after the story of gene edited babies. So it has always been positive. All right, and there are also qualitative evidence for the response or for the change in the tone of People's Daily. Before the November 26th incident, here are just some titles from the titles of the articles from People's Daily. Some titles are like human gene editing accepted by the public. Human gene editing will make you healthy and smart. Very positive. And also first human embryo gene editing success done by Chinese scientists. I will refer to this case specifically later. And also specifically, some articles are very interesting. They talk about how American scientists, other scientists from other countries, they cannot have this freedom to engage in research of, say, human embryo gene editing because of ethical concerns. So in this narrative, Chinese scientists have a significant advantage compared to like other scientists in the world because they don't have this ethical concern. But after the incident, here are just some titles of articles from People's Daily. It talks about ethics. It talks about legislature, that we need to develop laws to regulate scientific research. Scientific research should not leave ethics behind. So there was a significant change. And the reason I suspect for this change was public opinion online. And this figure shows the keyword and boson measures of the WeChat articles. And we can see both measures tell us that the public opinion on this story on WeChat was overwhelmingly negative. They criticized the story, criticized the scientists, criticized this technology and this irresponsible experiment. And here you see two shapes, two colors of dots. These two colors mean public accounts and official accounts, because on WeChat, we actually also have official accounts, like account of People's Daily, which is not included here, but there are also official accounts by local media, other government departments, they are included here. And we see there's no significant difference between official accounts and just commercial public accounts. So the public opinion was overwhelmingly negative. And here are some titles of the most popular articles on the story on that day. The popular articles are defined by articles viewed by over 100,000 people. So from these titles, we can also see that the public opinion was overwhelmingly negative. Not clear whether healthy these babies, whether necessary, whether like they are going to be protected by HIV and all that. So overwhelmingly negative public opinion on the story. And then here are the results of the WeChat comments. The other data set I want to show the public opinion is from the WeChat comments. It turns out that the sentiment measure of WeChat comments are not as accurate, because comments are usually shorter, much shorter than articles, and many comments are not really directly relevant to the story itself. Comments can comment on like the article, the author, the style of the paper, of the article. So I ended up taking 1,500 comments, a random sample of 1,500 comments out of the over 6,000 comments, and asked the two human holders to code those comments. And the human coders reported over 80% of comments were negative, taking aside the comments that are not relevant. And then according to other measures, the keyword measure returned 64% negative comments, and boson measure also around 60%. And then I also used the Baidu supervised and unsupervised method to measure all the comments, and returned 65% of negative comments. These three percentages do not seem so high, because there are many irrelevant comments that are also coded by these three measures. And those irrelevant measures are often coded in the positive category. So overall, I think the WeChat comments dataset also shows an overwhelmingly negative public opinion on the story. And I think that's the reason for the change in the tone, like of the public, in the tone of People's Daily. And another concern is the international pressure, the international attention on the story. So I measured all those, the sentiments of the Western articles. And this figure shows the red line here shows the sentiment measure, which means a positive number means positive sentiment. And the blue line here is the subjectivity measure. A negative value means it's more objective instead of subjective. So the results of the Western media articles actually show overall the tone of this coverage, the stories on Western media was actually slightly positive. But overwhelmingly, these articles are all quite objective. They present more objective information instead of subjective opinion or evaluation. And the reason why I think why the sentiment measure returned positive, slightly positive, because when you report the story, you will often use words like world first or like exchange. But this result is confirmed by the other measurement, the NLT measure, that also returned a very high probability of being neutral, articles being neutral, not really so negative, not really so positive. So Western media articles tend to present the story as like in a more objective style and do not involve a lot of evaluations or personal opinions. They often cite scientists supporting the story or scientists and also scientists criticizing the story. So it seems that Western pressure is not a big. The Western media did not present a very strong pressure on the Chinese government on that particular story. But then there are still some alternative explanations. Okay, hopefully I have convinced you the government has responded to the public opinion on that specific case. But still, there are some alternative explanations. One alternative explanation is elite learning. Some people say maybe it's not that government responded or changed its own propaganda, but they learned that this is dangerous and we cannot allow scientists to do that. And then the second explanation would be the nature of human embryo editing. So one argument could be that maybe the Chinese government has been positive on human gene editing, but not specifically on human embryo editing. And then still the concern of international pressure. To address these alternative concerns, I collected data on another case, the Huang Junjiu case. This case actually happened in April 2015. And this case actually was the first case where a scientist edited human embryo. And it was also done by a Chinese scientist. And at that time, nobody had edited human embryo. Huang Junjiu did it for the first time using some useless embryos because those embryos had one egg with two sperms, so which means they cannot be developed into human being. So that was that case, okay? And at that time, international community also had an outcry. The research was, Nature and Science refused to publish the research because of the ethical concerns, because they did not want to encourage scientists to edit human embryos. And at that time, in 2015, in most countries, it was illegal to edit human embryos, and a Chinese scientist did it. For that story, at that time, I collected only 34 articles from People's Daily because it was not a huge story. At that time, People's Daily, most of the articles on this case was positive, some were neutral, some mentioned the international concern, international criticism, but not negative. And then here is the timeline of the He Jiankui case. When this case happened, the Huang Junjiu case was still considered very positive. Okay, and at that time, the Western articles, although here still the Western articles show they were neutral. Okay, the blue dots here show the possibility of the articles being neutral. At that time, although they were like neutral, but there was a major outcry in the international science community, especially. And there was major like discussions about the ethical concerns of editing human like embryos, even useless like embryos. And the reason why I think at that time the People's Daily's articles was still very positive because it was not a huge story, and the public opinion in China was not overwhelmingly negative. And this figure shows the WeChat articles on this case. There were 87 WeChat articles on this case, and they were not overwhelmingly negative. Some were positive, some were neutral, some were negative. And here are the articles when the He Jiankui case happened. There were more articles at that time mentioned the Huang Junjiu case. And the measurement here shows those articles were negative because they were overwhelmingly negative on the He Jiankui case. Actually, a closer look of these articles will tell us that they also, the attitude on the Huang Junjiu case was still positive and neutral. So I think this other case have tell us that the Chinese government responded to the public opinion on the He Jiankui case, not the international pressure. Because for the Huang Junjiu case, there was also a huge international outcry from the science community, but the Chinese government did not change their own tone. They praised the case as a world's first by Chinese scientists. And then they maintained that tone up until the He Jiankui case. And I don't think it's the He Jiankui case, the response to the He Jiankui case was elite learning, because He Jiankui was the first one to create real babies, but Chinese scientists have done cases where they have edited human embryos before, and the government has paid attention to this kind of cases before. So they are well aware of the ethics and the risks of editing human embryos. And the possible reasons for this responsiveness, the biggest reason is social panic and instability, because in a talk by Xi Jinping, the president of China, literally said after the He Jiankui case, he literally said we need to be very vigilant and manage the serious risks in science, the risks in terms of social stability. And then it's because an apolitical case, so it's easier for the government to change its discourse. And then also the scientists, we cannot ignore their opinion on the He Jiankui case. The scientists were unified and they criticized the He Jiankui case. The scientists were more divided on the Huang Junjiu case. Some thought it's not ethical to edit human embryos. Some thought it's okay because those embryos are not gonna be developed into humans. All right, so here are some points I want you to take away. First, it's possible for propaganda to respond to public opinion when it's ineffective. But this responsiveness is very in an authoritarian style, because the government does not say, I changed my discourse. The government simply deleted the positive article. And then actually the positive articles from People's Daily on the Huang Junjiu case were all deleted today. Those articles were collected when I collected the He Jiankui case. Today, if you want to go to People's Daily online and search Huang Junjiu cases, those articles were all positive on the Huang Junjiu case, but they were all deleted today. So it's responsiveness in a style of self-censorship. It's a very authoritarian way of respond to public opinion. And then internet and social media are very powerful tools to voice people's opinion on one hand, but also they are very powerful tools for the authoritarian government to monitor public opinion and respond to public opinion. And then the conditions for this responsive propaganda need to be further tested. Here, I only provide some speculations about why the government changed its propaganda. All right, thank you. That's my talk, and I welcome questions and comments.
Okay, thank you, Shuai, for that presentation. At this point, Shuai Jin is available to take questions from the audience. You can ask a question using the Zoom Q&A button that appears at the bottom of your webinar window. If you wish to be recognized and ask your question via audio, just indicate that in your question. Otherwise, I will read your question aloud. So we've had a couple of questions come in during your talk, and so I figure we'll just start with those. The first one from Lucy Liu asks, did the People's Daily report a positive article on its website after it deleted the negative one? If not, why did the People's Daily only post the positive article in its WeChat and Weibo account?
The People's Daily deleted its positive article, and then it posts negative posts on social media. Yes, the People's Daily mainly posted the negative articles on social media. It's social media, not its official website. I suspect that because it's easier to make a response on the social media, and then it's easier to be consistent with the public opinion on social media instead of its official paper. The response that they had on the official paper was just deleting the original positive articles.
Valeria Popova asks, thank you very much for an interesting presentation. I would like to pick your brain on one aspect of authoritarian propaganda. Human genome editing, although a fascinating and rally around the flag topic, does not pose a real threat to the Chinese authorities. Hence, I imagine they could bend their stance on this issue after a public outrage. Had it been the case the debate was something about something that posed a direct threat to their power, like protests or political reforms, would we have seen a different response?
Yes, I would think so. That's why I say this responsiveness is very limited. If had this been a case about, say, protest in Hong Kong or like the change to the constitution, no, I don't think the government would respond to it. And then why I think this is still propaganda, even though it's not really directly related to, say, ideology or the survival of the regime, because the original coverage on human gene editing was still very propagandistic because they try to promote the sense of nationalism. They describe the issue as an international competition where China has to win. China has been left behind, from international scientist community on this specific technology, but now China is catching up, and China is going to overpass other countries. So that we need to allow more freedom for scientists to explore human gene editing. So that was the narrative. They wanted to, the purpose was to promote nationalism and patriotism. And the narrative was very much we have to win this international competition. But then when the public outbreak, outcry broke regarding to the He Jiankui case, then they changed the tone. They said, we need to consider ethics. not just ignore ethics and then pursue scientific development. So this is limited responsiveness, but it shows it's possible. And the conditions for this responsiveness to happen, of course, we need more research. And I would think one necessary condition for this responsiveness would be an apolitical case where the government has its own stance. They can't try to promote sentiment or public opinion in a certain way, but it's okay if they have to change it.
Is there is there a way of sort of turning this analysis around to try to use the communication efforts of the People's Daily or government releases to determine which issues they see as core to their survival or to their continued governance, and which ones they see as peripheral? Because it strikes me that if we can assume that's true, and I think that's a pretty safe assumption given all that we know about authoritarian regimes, we could use their communications to figure out essentially which things they're willing to compromise on and which things they're not.
That's actually a very, very interesting question, and that I would like to pursue, because one interesting phenomenon that I observed through studying these cases was the self-censorship. People often talk about like censorship, like government delete all these posts online and articles, but they apparently also engage in self-censorship. Mm-hmm. There are many articles that were on People's Daily, its website, but then when the outcry broke, they deleted those articles. That's self-censorship. So, and then on the Huang Junjiu case, when I came back to collect articles from People's Daily, they were all deleted. They were not there. So I think a possible way to answer your question is to monitor the articles from People's Daily or other like Xinhua News, and then see how often they engage in this self-censorship, and on what issues they would like to, they were willing to do that, and on what issues it's absolutely not possible. Then we can see for certain topics, we can first analyze why certain articles were deleted, right? On certain, maybe on certain specific issues, and maybe because there was a public opinion like conflict. Then we can differentiate like what are the core interests in the eyes of the authoritarian regime, and what are the other issues that they are willing to like change or give up or give in to the public or adjust their own position.
At the risk of asking an obvious question, if we were to do this kind of analysis on, let's say, the U.S. government, which I think is not authoritarian yet, I think we would probably see some similarity in terms of the government's willingness to sort of change its position on issues depending on public outcry, and probably some issues in which they're not. How would you expect an analysis of U.S. government communications, let's say issued by the White House or by the press secretary, something like that, to compare to statements or stories that are issued by news organizations controlled by the Chinese government?
I think the reason why you think it's not an authoritarian yet is because we still have multiple parties controlling the government. So we certainly don't observe like the continuity, like all the articles that I examined from People's Daily were dated back to like 2013, 2014 up until 2021. So that's the continuity, and then we can examine like how flexible the government is on certain issues. Here we have different governments, the parties take control.
Right.
So there's that. And then the other difference I would think is the style of responsiveness. Even if, say, the US government makes like some false claim or some claim that's challenged by the public, if they want to respond to it, they will, I think, I guess, they will respond to it. They will retweet the article and then say the government had made a mistake, and actually this is our new understanding, right? For instance, the mask wearing. Like at the beginning, I think many officials and government agencies said it was not so helpful because to wear masks because you had higher risks touching your face or things like that. And then they changed the narrative, and they said it's the most effective way, like you have to wear a mask. But then the responsiveness that we observe in China is basically self-censorship. They did not say we were wrong. They did not say, okay, we need to retract those articles. They did not say ethics, we treated them like not important. Now we treat them as very important. They were like deleted the original positive articles and then pretended that never happened, and pretended that ethics has always been a very important concern for the Chinese government in terms of scientific research. So I think those are the two differences I can think of. But in terms of propaganda, nowadays in authoritarian regimes, they do have many similarities with, say, government public relationship or in democratic countries. Because today's propaganda in authoritarian regimes are not so like hard propaganda, are not so ideological, like obsessively boring and ideological that we observe in, say, Stalin's Soviet Union or Mao's China. They are not like that anymore. They are very subtle. They often combine ideology, pro-regime narrative, and some specific issue or some policy. So it's actually very similar, becomes more and more similar to government-public relationship in democratic governments.
That's kind of what I was getting at. The distinction seems to be narrowing. I also think I'm curious to what extent you can separate, in the case of China, structural influences and cultural ones, because I think of, for example, Japanese government, which is a democratic government, I think, although it has had a one-party dominance for a long time. And it also, I can think of some examples where it also refused to sort of admit that it had been wrong in the past. And not to say that that's the only government that does that. Our government has done that as well. But they could also be. I wonder the extent to which we can separate the authoritarian nature of any particular government from the cultural norms about saving face or being wrong. Nobody likes to be wrong, but some people hate it more than others, and so I kind of wonder how these two things interact.
I think, yeah, there might be also a cultural like influence here. Yes, there is a kind of famous saying in Chinese history that says leaders they never admit their mistakes. Like they understand their mistakes and they correct their mistakes by implementing different policies, but they never admit their mistakes because leaders are not supposed to admit they are wrong. They are supposed to tell their people that they are always correct. So I think that there is a cultural factor plays like influencing, playing a role here. But the structural reason, I think, in democracies, other than, say, cases like Japan, where one party obviously is going to win the election or have one party has an obvious dominance, when you have more competitive election, right? When the other party is going to point out your mistakes, then it's probably better to admit your own mistakes, right? We're up to it, like what Biden did. Like, okay, he supported this and that in early days, but he owned up to his own mistakes. I think if in a more competitive environment, then the strategies would be different.
It is, yeah, kind of interesting that I think often in authoritarian regimes, admitting mistakes uh, uh, initiates a problem, right? You think of like perestroika and glasnost in the USSR sort of initiated the process, which eventually led to the dissolution of the state. But in democratic regimes, often, even though people still don't want to do it, admitting mistakes actually usually makes you look better. It helps your case, despite the fact that people still hate admitting their mistakes. They avoid it and they prevaricate and whatever. Well, we're out of time, so I want to thank Shuai for being our presenter this week. I want to remind everyone that the presentation will be posted to our website after the broadcast if you'd like to share it with a colleague or watch it again. I also want to invite you to join us next week, March 5th, when we will host a talk by Justin Grimmer of Stanford University. He's giving a talk entitled Naive Regression Requires Weaker Assumptions Than Factor Models to Adjust for Multiple Cause Confounding. Please see our website, www.methods-colloquium.com, to get more information about this talk. Shuai, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Justin.
And I hope to see everyone next time.